We did not meet humanity in fire. That truth alone should have alerted every observer, every elder, every strategist in the Galactic Senate. No fleets erupted in light. No superweapons glimmered on the edge of a star. No world trembled with anticipation. They arrived, instead, with calm, politeness, a smile, and we, proud, ancient, and infinitely experienced, mistook it for naivety. I remember the first day of contact as if etched into my neural pathways by some deliberate design. From my observation deck high above the Senate chamber, I watched the human delegation glide through the gates of the upper chamber, unarmed, unarmored, unaccompanied by honor guards or threatening constructs. No pheromonal intimidations, no gravity wells projecting dominance, no flashing weapons to mark territory. Just them, walking with measured steps, heads held naturally, eyes meeting our scrutiny without fear. Their lead diplomat moved with what we would call grace in human terms. It was unsettling to watch. Each gesture was soft, deliberate, almost disarming. Their lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. They bowed, not in subservience, but in recognition of our presence, of protocol, of ceremony. And then they spoke. "We are here to help," the human said. The chamber erupted, not in anger, but confusion. Silence hung first, then laughter. The ancient elders of the Senate, species whose empires spanned centuries, whose fleets had reduced countless civilizations to rubble, found the humans' words absurd. Predators do not act gentle. Apex species conquer or are conquered. That is the law we have observed for eons. And yet, humanity did neither. We laughed at them. I remember the way the Ceridian counselor clicked its mandibles, a guttural, mocking sound. The Morithians flared their luminescent crests, signaling amusement. Even the human translators, tasked with decoding gestures and speech, seemed slightly confused. But the humans did not falter. They remained calm. They did not raise their voices. They did not display aggression in response to mockery. In the cycles that followed, humanity's behavior became maddeningly consistent. When a trade station on the rim suffered reactor failure, it was human engineers who arrived first, unarmed, unaccompanied, repairing the station at their own cost. When border skirmishes left civilians wounded, human medical ships entered contested states to treat them, refusing payment, refusing leverage, refusing recognition. They moved like ghosts through zones we assumed were dangerous, and they smiled while doing it. The Senate began to grow comfortable, too comfortable. They assumed that what they did not understand must be harmless. They interpreted each act of mercy as an overreach, a naive attempt to ingratiate themselves. They believed these humans were cautious, fearful, weak. I did not share that view. I began observing them closely, analyzing every gesture, every pause, every logistical choice. The humans were precise. Their relief convoys traveled with military-like precision. Shield harmonics aligned perfectly with mission protocols. Medical ships bore the markings of humanitarian fleets, yet their hulls were layered, reinforced far beyond what any rational emergency response required. Diplomatic meetings unfolded in serene tones, yet no ground was surrendered. Offers of aid came with no expectation of return, but with meticulous recording and tracking, methods, in effect, of controlled observation. I began noticing subtleties others ignored. A human diplomat, politely declining an offer of exclusive trade privileges, did so without hesitation. The voice remained gentle, the posture remained neutral, yet the refusal carried a firmness that left the counselors floundering. Their politeness had power embedded within it. The archives they shared freely, almost recklessly, reinforced the impression. Humanity had endured planetary plagues, global wars, extinction-level events. Every record of suffering was met with adaptation, innovation, and survival. No species endures such trials without learning how to wield force, not indiscriminately, but precisely, strategically, lethally if needed. That understanding chilled me. Humanity's kindness was not instinct, it was policy, a framework of self-restraint crafted with knowledge of their own capacity for destruction. They had mastered a discipline that no other apex species had ever achieved, restraint calibrated with the exact knowledge of consequences. I remember one evening, reviewing sensor data from a human medical convoy navigating contested space, noticing the subtle layering of defensive systems. Not active, not aggressive, but ready, waiting. If provoked beyond the permissible line, the consequences would be immediate and unavoidable. This was not weakness. This was control. As the Senate congratulated itself for taming humanity, I shivered. We had assumed mercy meant fear. We had assumed patience meant submission. We had assumed the lack of aggression meant incapacity. And in every assumption, we were wrong. Before they departed the chamber, their lead diplomat paused at the threshold. Their gaze swept the room, slow and methodical, not threatening, not aggressive, but measuring, calculating, evaluating, assessing whether the Senate, the entire assembly, was worthy of their kindness. A question lingered in that gaze, silent, unspoken. Will they deserve it? Then the doors closed behind them, and I realized far too late that first contact had ended the moment they arrived. The test had begun, because humanity's kindness was not innocence. It was not naivete. It was the first move in a game we did not yet understand, a game in which they already knew all the rules, and we had walked onto the board, blind, smiling, and unarmed. The Galactic Senate was the heart of the galaxy, or at least it claimed to be. A sprawling council of thousands of delegates from every known system, it thrived on hierarchy, intimidation, and the unspoken rule that power is proven through domination. Mercy was inefficiency. Compassion was a liability. The weak, the cautious, and the kind were tolerated only if they served as tools for amusement or leverage. And then, humanity arrived. Their first acts were subtle. They repaired trade stations, provided food to colonies in famine, and healed wounded aliens without demand, without expectation, without ceremony. At first, most counselors dismissed them as anomalies, then as curiosities, then as irritants. But a growing minority, including myself, began to notice patterns, calculated patterns, methodical and unnervingly consistent. During closed sessions, behind reinforced transparasteel doors where only the counselors, a handful of advisors and observers like me were permitted, the elder species dissected humanity openly. They mocked them with the bluntness of millennia-old arrogance. One Ceridian counselor, its jagged mandibles clattering, sneered, "They fear us." The Morithians, their crests glowing in a dull, cold rhythm, added their own jeers. A species that smiles at predators is either naive or foolish, they said. And the chamber erupted with laughter. I remained silent, my optical sensors fixed on the humans' recorded gestures and transmissions. My datapads captured every nuance, the tilt of a head, the pause before a phrase, the faint ripple of a smile. They were calm. They were unwavering. They were not naive. I had access to the human historical archives, shared freely as if arrogance itself had been replaced with recklessness. I pored over centuries of disasters, wars, plagues, and extinction-level crises. Entire continents had been consumed by disease. Planetary systems had burned under civil strife. Yet humanity endured. Every calamity was cataloged, analyzed, and addressed. Every failure became a lesson. Every loss became a blueprint for survival. No species could endure so much suffering without mastering the ability to wield power when necessary. Humanity had survived the impossible repeatedly, and the Senate, arrogant, short-sighted, blind, believed that smiling, helping, and apologizing was weakness. We were wrong. The Senate voted to test them, a controlled provocation, a minor border incident, a disruption designed to force a reaction, a carefully measured pressure intended to reveal either vulnerability or aggression. The vote passed with near unanimity. Even those who doubted the humans assumed this would be an exercise in humiliation. The provocation unfolded. We disrupted supply lines along contested trade routes, delayed communications, and dispatched minor fleet squadrons toward human colonies. When they responded, they did not send fleets to attack, did not mobilize warships. They offered apologies. They dispatched aid. They repaired damages. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of triumph. Delegates celebrated the incompetence of this young species, congratulating themselves for exposing what they perceived as weakness. I, alone, recorded everything, my sensors capturing subtleties others ignored, precise coordination, timing, and control that betrayed meticulous planning. That night, I analyzed human transmissions in detail, secure fleet channels, encrypted civilian communications, command logs. Everything they shared internally was methodical, exacting, and terrifying. I discovered restraint protocols, escalation thresholds, contingency doctrines, named not after enemies, not after regions or battles, but after worst-case scenarios. Entire strategic frameworks existed solely to contain humanity's own potential, calibrated, calculated, tested repeatedly. I realized then that the humans were not unprepared. They were waiting for certainty, waiting for a threshold beyond which moral restraint could no longer apply. The Senate's laughter rang hollow in my mind. We had mistaken patience for fear. We had assumed kindness was naivety. We had believed that their unwillingness to strike back immediately meant incapacity. And yet, in every signal, every log, every transmission, it became clear the humans were studying us with equal care. They had cataloged every provocation, every strategic weakness, every failure of Senate oversight. They were learning. In one particularly chilling transmission, a human fleet commander noted, "Phase 1 restraint is still in effect. All further provocations will be logged and analyzed." The moral line. The thought struck me like a cold shock through my neural pathways. They were not ignoring us. They were not yielding. They were measuring, waiting, preparing. I had access to the same archives the Senate relied upon to justify its assumptions. I knew that every apex species, when pushed, reacted with immediate escalation. Humans did not. They restrained. And in restraint, there was power. A power the Senate could not fathom. I began observing patterns in their fleet movements, relief efforts, and diplomatic missions. Ships moved through hostile space as if invisible. Convoys were unarmed, yet perfectly defended. Human medical vessels arrived at conflict zones with efficiency that defied probability. Negotiations were calm, deliberate, and strategically advantageous, not through coercion, but through observation. Every act, every measure, every polite interaction was a test, and the Senate, in its hubris, failed spectacularly. By the time I realized the truth, the chamber had already voted again. Another border incursion, another test, another provocation. Each time humanity responded with unwavering kindness and efficiency. The elders cheered, believing it to be cowardice. I recorded the timestamps, the fleet coordinates, the human communications. Their patience was infinite, their discipline complete. Their silence was not passivity, it was calculation.
And the thought that gripped me most tightly, the one I could not shake, was this. The Senate believed it held all the cards, but the humans were observing, cataloging, measuring, and waiting. And unlike us, they were not constrained by ego, tradition, or fear of protocol. They were constrained only by their ethics. A species capable of such restraint was dangerous in ways the Senate could not yet comprehend. The test had begun, and we, the Senate, had already lost. The provocation escalated, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, then with a clarity that made even the most confident Senate delegates uneasy. Trade lanes once assumed secure were interrupted. Convoys disappeared mid-route. Communications from outer colonies were delayed, distorted, or threatened. Some of these disruptions were opportunistic raids, others tacitly sanctioned by factions within the Senate, the kind that enjoyed watching the human response, or anticipated that none would come. And then the accident occurred. A human medical convoy, fully marked, fully compliant with all interstellar treaties, destroyed in the Upper Zatari corridor. Non-combatants, civilians, scientists, healers, gone. We expected retaliation. The elders whispered predictions, comparing human strategy to that of other apex species. They will strike back, the counselors said. But humanity did something entirely unexpected. They doubled their relief efforts. Not as revenge, not as posturing, not as a demonstration of strength, but as a deliberate act of care, precision, and unrelenting observation. Medical ships moved into hostile space unescorted. They evacuated civilians from systems controlled by hostile factions. They repaired colonies damaged by Senate-backed raids. They restored infrastructure, restored food distribution, restored hope. Every mission was carefully logged, analyzed, and monitored. Every movement was precise, calculated, deliberate. I watched from my observation station, recording fleets as they navigated asteroid belts, patrol zones, and dangerous warp corridors. Ships glided with the quiet confidence of creatures who knew no threat could surprise them. Yet there were no weapons drawn, no displays of aggression. Their presence alone was enough. Among my people, fear began to spread. Whispers of disbelief ran through the ranks of observers. No species absorbs such humiliation without response, unless they are planning something far worse. In our histories, only apex predators reacted this way. A species that endured insult, provocation, and loss without retaliation was always concealing a capacity for devastation beyond comprehension. Curiosity overrode caution. I began intercepting human internal transmissions, encrypted, protected, meant for their commanders and fleet coordinators. What I found chilled me more than any warship ever could. Civilians mourned, quietly, with stoicism. Leaders spoke not of vengeance, but of lines, ethical thresholds, escalation limits, contingency protocols. Every loss was logged, every casualty was a lesson. "We are still being kind," one human fleet commander said in a secure channel, voice calm, precise, almost serene. The weight of that statement settled over me like a black cloud. Kindness was not default. It was a deliberate phase, a calculated restraint, a filter through which every action was measured. The galaxy applauded a human hospital ship as it shielded an alien refugee fleet from a raiding force. The ship absorbed the bombardment without retaliating. Shields glowed, hull plating strained, but not a single weapon was fired in response. Enemy ships were disrupted, rerouted, contained, not destroyed. Human crews rescued civilians, treated enemy wounded, returned prisoners alive. Precision over passion, restraint over rage. Across the Senate, jubilation turned to confusion. Delegates whispered, "They are weak." But I could see the flaw in that belief. Their calm was not weakness. Their silence was not fear. Their discipline was terrifying. Every human operation revealed pattern, logic, and moral calculus. They were observing the Senate, noting the flaws, the arrogance, the hypocrisy. Every provocation was catalogued. Every exploit of kindness, every test of patience, logged for analysis. And then the truth became apparent. The humans were not passive. They were assessing. They were learning. They were waiting for the precise moment when restraint would become insufficient, when action would be necessary, not for revenge, but for the protection of innocence and the enforcement of morality. I watched fleet after fleet execute rescue operations with flawless efficiency. Starports destroyed by sabotage were rebuilt overnight. Entire colonies were supplied with food, water, and medical aid without fanfare. The Senate, meanwhile, continued to interpret every gesture as proof of human weakness. But I knew the truth. Humanity's kindness was the calm before the storm. Every act of mercy was a test of our ethics. Every refusal to strike back exposed who respected their restraint and who sought to exploit it, and the Senate, in its arrogance, kept failing the test. For weeks, I monitored transmissions, both public and private. I watched humans manage disasters, reroute fleets, heal populations, and negotiate ceasefires with hostile factions, all without raising a weapon unnecessarily. Every maneuver was precise, every decision was deliberate, every casualty minimized, every moral boundary observed. It was terrifying in its clarity. They thought not as predators, not as conquerors, but as stewards. Their discipline was so complete, their ethical calculus so meticulous, that it made every other apex species in the galaxy seem primitive by comparison. By the time the Senate realized the gravity of what they had misjudged, it was too late. Humanity's kindness was no longer just a test, it was a warning, one the galaxy had failed to heed. And I understood, finally, what the human commanders had meant. This is not war. It is restraint. It is observation. It is judgment. And the galaxy, I realized with a growing chill, would soon learn that the kindest species are often the most dangerous when pushed. Because kindness is deliberate, kindness is measured, and measured power, when exercised with precision, patience, and principle, is unstoppable. The provocation had begun, humanity had responded, and the consequences would echo across every star system in ways the Senate had never imagined. The turning point arrived not with a roar, but with silence, not with fire, but with inevitability. The target was a human evacuation world, small, unarmed, filled entirely with civilians, children, scholars, families, and the displaced. A Senate strike group, acting without full authorization, descended in force. Their weapons bristled, their shields glowed menacingly, their ships hovered with the arrogance of those convinced that weakness invites conquest. For 6 minutes, humanity tried negotiation. Communications channels opened. Pleas, explanations, and surrender terms poured through subspace, calm and measured. Ceasefire, allow evacuation, protect innocents, they said. Not a threat, not a demand, but an imperative framed with patience. For 6 minutes, the strike commanders ignored them. Time stretched, a taut line of tension across the void. My sensors recorded every pulse, every flicker of reaction among the Senate observers watching remotely. Most anticipated that after 6 minutes, human restraint would collapse. They expected rage, They expected retaliation. They expected vengeance. Nothing happened. Then the transmissions changed. The cadence flattened. Words sharpened. Their tone became precise, almost clinical. The subtle warmth, the soft gestures, the polite cadence, all gone. In its place was clarity, efficiency, determination. What followed was not fury, it was mastery. Human fleets emerged from positions we never detected. Ships that had seemed ordinary in orbit, transformed mid-flight. Civilian vessels unfolded armor like living creatures awakening from slumber. Shields hummed, defenses aligned automatically. Strategic formations emerged in perfect synchronization, invisible until fully deployed. Every movement, every maneuver, calculated to disable, not destroy. The strike group, heavily armed, confident, relentless, was neutralized in 90 seconds. Not annihilated, not eradicated, but rendered completely ineffective. Weapons were disarmed, engines locked, communications disrupted, boarding channels blocked, no lives lost unnecessarily. Boarding teams deployed with precision, survivors were rescued, enemy wounded were treated, prisoners were returned unharmed. Every action deliberate, every choice bound by a moral framework alien to every other apex species in history.
And then the logs revealed the most chilling detail of all. Phase 1, restraint, lifted. The chamber watching remotely erupted in disbelief, in nervous laughter, in derision. Delegates whispered to each other, certain that restraint signaled fear. Humanity's calm, their measured precision, could only mean they were still cowed, they argued. I knew differently. I traced the fleet transmissions in detail. Every vector, every deployment, every tactical decision. It was controlled by a species who knew exactly what they could do, and chose not to do more than necessary. Their restraint was no longer a filter. It had become a warning, a demonstration of potential, a message to the Senate and the galaxy that kindness is a choice exercised with full awareness of consequence. And the smile was gone. Gone from their diplomats, gone from their fleets, gone from the eyes of those who had previously seemed disarmingly gentle. The warmth that had confused, disarmed, and unsettled the Senate vanished, replaced by something far more terrifying. Certainty. Absolute, unflinching certainty. For the first time, the galaxy saw humanity as they truly were. Not naive, not timid, not merely kind, but apex predators with ethics, restraint, and the capacity to act with surgical precision when necessity demanded. Across the Senate, whispers spread. Some denied what they had seen, attributing it to fleet coordination errors or miscommunication. Others were frozen in disbelief. The elders who had scoffed at humanity's initial gestures of kindness now stared, unblinking, their crests dim, their pride fractured. I watched every transmission, every log, every human tactical communication. Even as they neutralized the strike group, their ships moved as though they feared no one, but respected every life they touched. Civilians were unharmed, prisoners were returned. Every action carried the signature of calculated restraint. It was, in the words of my species, horrifying. A species with power beyond comprehension, executing judgment with calm precision, and yet refusing cruelty. A species that had waited until the line of immorality was truly crossed, and then responded not with rage, but with undeniable control. The Senate had misjudged them from the beginning. Every assumption that patience was weakness, that kindness was naivety, that restraint was fear, was incorrect. Every laugh, every mockery, every vote to provoke, every minor strike, all had revealed the extent of human observation, calculation, and ethical rigor. As I recorded the aftermath, I realized the magnitude of the lesson. Humanity's kindness had been the most dangerous warning we had ignored. We had assumed we were testing them. In truth, we had been observed, measured, cataloged, and evaluated, and we had failed spectacularly. For the first time, the galaxy understood that a species could be simultaneously merciful, powerful, and terrifying. That restraint, exercised deliberately, could unmake centuries of arrogance, destabilize hierarchies, and shatter the illusions of dominance. The smile had faded, and in that absence, a quiet terror settled over every species watching remotely. Because now, humanity's true nature was revealed, not through words, not through anger, not through conquest, but through precision, efficiency, and choice. And the galaxy understood, finally, that the kindest species is often the most dangerous, not when they rage, but when they stop smiling. Humanity did not declare war. That is the first thing every observer must understand. There was no proclamation of conquest, no banners unfurled across captured systems, no fleets raining destruction across the void. Humanity declared responsibility. They claimed not dominion, but accountability. And in that, the galaxy sensed the weight of a force it had never truly measured. Strategic hubs fell, not with annihilation, but with precision. Planets, long thought impregnable, were secured without the destruction of cities or the loss of civilian life. Fleets attempting evasive maneuvers were intercepted mid-jump, their engines locked, their weapons rendered inert. Communication networks, commandeered from hostile factions, were hijacked, not silenced, not destroyed, but recalibrated to broadcast humanity's terms galaxy-wide. Every species could hear the same message in multiple languages with no ambiguity. We will act where cruelty exists. We will intervene where suffering persists. Innocence will be spared. Threats will be contained. Entire empires collapsed in weeks, not because humanity sought domination, but because they executed strategy with a clarity and discipline alien to any other apex species. To observe them in action was to watch a civilization conducting a symphony of ethical precision. Systems that had relied on fear as currency, alliances built on coercion, governments enforced through terror, all unraveled when faced with humans who balanced power with morality, capacity with conscience. From my alien perspective, it was horrifying. Their soldiers did not fight with the fury of predators. They moved with the discipline of a species who had rehearsed every contingency, every tactic, every moral dilemma, until war itself became a solvable problem. Human commanders spoke as much of ethics as of victory, measuring every action against the consequences not for themselves, but for the innocent. "We end this fast," a human general stated over secure channels, voice calm, unwavering. Across the galaxy, the Senate fractured. Some counselors begged for mercy, appealing to logic, tradition, or the absurd hope that diplomacy could still control the species. Others demanded annihilation, convinced that no species could be allowed such control without fear. Humanity responded the same way to both: calm, precise, methodical containment. No wrath, no indulgence, no deviation. Their response was consistent, controlled, unavoidable. Every fleet movement was measured, every strike calculated, every civilian protected. Threats were neutralized, cruelty ended, lives were preserved where possible. I traced fleet deployments across multiple sectors simultaneously. Entire hostile fleets immobilized mid-orbit, leadership decapitated without loss of civilian life, sabotage operations thwarted without collateral damage, and communication relays restructured to maintain order and prevent panic. Every human action was executed with surgical precision, leaving nothing to chance. By observing them, I realized a terrifying truth. Human kindness was always a filter. It revealed those who respected it and those who sought to exploit it. Allies were strengthened, threats were exposed, and threats were dealt with efficiently, decisively, without excess. I watched the transformation of the galaxy in real time. Systems once chaotic, lawless, or occupied by tyrants began functioning again. Economies rebounded. Refugees returned to homeworlds. Trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange resumed, all coordinated under a framework of human oversight, but never domination. The humans did not claim rulers' titles. They assumed the responsibilities of judges, stewards, and protectors. And everywhere I looked, their restraint was as terrifying as their power. Every fleet, every mission, every decision was bound by a set of moral rules that surpassed the arbitrary ethics of the Senate. Where we would have destroyed, they contained. Where we would have punished, they rehabilitated. Where we would have conquered, they preserved. For the first time, a species wielded absolute power and chose to exercise it with deliberate mercy. And that mercy was more formidable than any weapon, more terrifying than any fleet, and more consequential than any Senate decree. I observed enemy fleets attempting to regroup, only to find their strategies anticipated, neutralized, or redirected in ways that left them powerless without a single civilian casualty. Planetary fortresses were rendered inoperative without leveling cities. Communications were taken over to broadcast surrender terms, safety assurances, and protocols for humane compliance. Every act revealed a species that had mastered not only war, but morality, ethics, and justice simultaneously. Even the most experienced observers among my people whispered their disbelief. "They fight like gods," one said, "but they do not kill unnecessarily. they command without cruelty. I realized then the full scale of what humanity had accomplished. Their kindness had always been a test, a filter, and a warning. And for those who ignored it, the consequences were immediate. For those who respected it, alliances formed organically. And for the Senate, arrogant, naive, cruel, the lesson was irreversible. Power measured against ethics, exercised deliberately, is invincible.
No empire could withstand a species that combined moral clarity with unerring precision. No council could maintain authority when restraint revealed capacity. And no species, however ancient, could presume to understand an apex predator who chooses mercy as the default, yet is prepared to unleash judgment with exactitude when morality demands it. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. We assumed that restraint was weakness, patience was fear, and kindness was naivety. We were wrong. Every act, every decision, every ethical boundary tested had proven the opposite. Humanity is most formidable when they choose peace deliberately, when they exercise restraint fully, and when they act only when injustice or cruelty threatens the innocent. And in that choice, the deliberate, conscious exercise of power and ethics, the galaxy recognized, finally, what I had begun to suspect from first contact. Restraint is not weakness. Mercy is not incapacity. Choice is the greatest power of all. Humanity had stopped holding back, and in doing so, they reshaped the galaxy not with rage, but with principle. The Galactic Senate did not collapse in fire. There were no fleets vaporized in dramatic displays, no supernovae igniting the void. Its end came quietly, methodically, and irreversibly. The great chambers that had for millennia echoed with debates, lies, and veiled threats now trembled under the weight of exposure. The foundation of power, built on fear, tradition, and manipulation, was being dismantled, without a single human weapon fired. Humanity entered the Senate, not with armies, not with fleets, not with the thunder of force, but with irrefutable evidence. Holo displays shimmered to life across the chamber, recordings of every provocation, every clandestine vote, every unauthorized strike against human colonies. The visuals, soundscapes, and records were undeniable, transmitted in real time across the galaxy. Star systems watched as centuries of corruption, neglect, and cruelty unfolded with surgical precision, stripping away every claim to authority the Senate had made. The alien representatives were given a voice. Some were complicit, others naive, and a few desperately unaware. They accused, they justified, they lied. The chamber resonated with panic, indignation, and deflection. Some tried to rationalize their actions, to spin history, to maintain a veneer of dignity. Others trembled under the weight of their own conscience. Humans listened, they observed, and then they responded, not emotionally, not vindictively, but with unyielding precision. Every falsehood was dissected, every excuse met with fact, every manipulation unraveled. A system built on intimidation and selective cruelty collapsed under the clarity of moral and strategic inevitability. In hours, centuries of political manipulation disintegrated. Alliances held together by fear, treaties enforced by coercion, hierarchies maintained through threats, all dismantled.
The Senate's so-called peace, we realized, had never been peace. It was an illusion, enforced through terror and selective oppression. Humanity revealed it for what it truly was. And yet they did not take control. They did not declare themselves rulers of the galaxy. They did not impose their will through fear or dominance. They demanded only accountability. They demanded recognition of truth. They insisted that injustice be corrected, not perpetuated. Every action, every motion, every decision carried an unspoken principle. Authority exists to serve morality, not ego. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an apex species offered power and refused to take it. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Delegates, some terrified, some humiliated, some bewildered, could only watch as the humans methodically corrected centuries of inequity. As I observed from my station, I recorded every nuance, the subtle hesitation in a counselor's speech, the faltering of those who had relied on fear as their currency, the ripple of doubt spreading like a virus across the Senate floor. Humanity's restraint radiated through the chamber, a force as absolute and uncompromising as gravity itself. Humanity had proven a simple, terrifying truth. Power does not need to dominate to exist. It only needs to be wielded with certainty, clarity, and principle. Every delegate, every representative, every observer understood this intuitively, even those who resisted acknowledgement. They did not celebrate, they did not gloat, they did not demand reverence. They simply acted, restored order, corrected wrongs, ensured that accountability replaced fear. And in doing so, they established a precedent no other species could ignore. Morality enforced with capability is the ultimate authority. The galaxy watched. It had never witnessed restraint exercised on such a scale, with such precision and such moral clarity. And I realized for the first time that humanity's power was not measured by the fleets they deployed or the weapons they held. It was measured by the conscious choice to act ethically while possessing the capacity for devastation beyond comprehension. The Senate, once a symbol of apex authority, crumbled under this revelation, not through force, but through understanding. Every species realized that a society capable of deliberate restraint and absolute control could stabilize the galaxy without subjugation, without conquest, without the brutality that had defined interstellar relations for eons. And the galaxy understood, at last, that restraint is more formidable than wrath, that mercy, exercised with full awareness of capacity, is more absolute than any weapon, that choice, deliberate and unwavering, is the ultimate expression of power. Humanity's trial of the Senate concluded not with fire, but with realization. And in that realization, a quiet terror spread through every corner of the galaxy. Because now we understood.
Humanity had observed, catalogued, and judged, and they had chosen mercy over dominance. They had chosen principle over ego. They had chosen restraint over rage. And in that choice lay the most formidable weapon any species could ever wield. The Senate would never recover its former pride. The galaxy would never forget the lesson. And humanity had, without firing a shot, reshaped the very rules of interstellar conduct. The inquiry lingered in my mind as I observed them. Across systems, from rebuilt colonies to liberated starports, from refugee fleets to newly restored trade hubs, the humans moved with the quiet precision of a species who understood both their power and their responsibility. Their memorials were vast, honoring losses far greater than victories. Entire fleets were dedicated to rescue operations, not conquest. Laws were meticulously constructed to constrain themselves more than others, ethical boundaries codified not to restrict the galaxy, but to restrain their own capacity. I observed a fleet of humans dock at a recovering planetary system. The refugees were young, frightened, hungry. The humans distributed supplies methodically, with no flourish, no displays of superiority, and yet with authority so absolute it left the local governors in awe. They did not seek gratitude, and yet they commanded respect. Their greatest fear, I realized, was not the galaxy or the Senate or potential adversaries. It was becoming the monsters that other apex species assumed they were. They had survived plagues that annihilated populations, wars that razed continents, and interstellar crises that destroyed entire worlds. They had endured the unimaginable, and they had emerged not ruthless, not bloodthirsty, not obsessed with revenge, but guided by ethics, principle, and restraint. I studied the human command logs in secret. Every mission, every fleet deployment, every engagement carried annotations about moral thresholds, escalation limits, and contingency plans. They had codified self-restraint to a degree no other species had ever attempted. The more I observed, the more terrifying it became. Humans were not naive. They were not timid. They were apex predators who chose not to dominate, not because they lacked the ability, but because they had mastered the terrifying discipline of moral self-control. Their kindness was not a weakness. It was a conscious, deliberate strategy. They understood the full extent of their capacity for destruction, yet they chose restraint. Every act of mercy, every decision to heal rather than harm,
every careful avoidance of unnecessary death was a testament to the most formidable kind of power, self-imposed limitation. And this, I realized, was what frightened the galaxy most. For the first time, a species could act with overwhelming precision, limitless capacity, and absolute moral clarity, and choose not to strike until it was ethically required. The kindest among them were also the most terrifying. I spoke to observers from other species, trying to convey the full scope of the revelation. They do not rage like us. They do not strike like us. They are patient, precise, principled, and they will act decisively when necessary. Human fleets moved silently in the void, humanitarian missions and protective deployments executed with flawless coordination. Refugees were relocated, infrastructure restored, and threats neutralized, but always with meticulous care. Every system they touched flourished under guidance, not control. And yet every observer knew that this peace could, if provoked past moral limits, unleash devastation on a scale no species had ever seen. The galaxy learned, slowly, that human kindness was not a default state, but a choice exercised with full awareness of consequence. And that choice, more than fleets, more than weapons, more than politics, was the most terrifying power any species could possess. Humans had endured everything, learned everything, mastered everything, and in their calm, measured mercy lay the quietest, deadliest warning of all. A species that restrains itself deliberately wields power beyond imagination. And so the question echoed endlessly among the observers, analysts, and counselors. If they are capable of this restraint, if they can wield such power responsibly, what happens the moment they decide restraint is no longer moral? I did not have to wait to find out. The galaxy already knew. The new galactic order did not arrive with fanfare. There were no proclamations of conquest. No species bowed in fear. No fleets patrolled worlds as overlords. Humanity did not claim dominion. They stabilized, guided, and enforced order, not through domination, but through principle. Every corner of the galaxy that had been fractured, exploited, or abandoned now thrummed with quiet structure. Trade lanes once besieged by pirates or political interference now functioned seamlessly. Communications were restored across hundreds of systems. Refugees returned to homeworlds. Food, water, and medicine reached every inhabited planet. Civilizations that had teetered on the brink of collapse were rebuilt, guided by humans acting as stewards rather than rulers. And their final message was simple, broadcast to every system, every species. We will be kind, always, but kindness is not surrender. It was a proclamation unlike any other in galactic history. No threats, no promises of retaliation, no declarations of dominion, just clarity, precision, principle, and the weight of truth that echoed across the cosmos. Do not mistake kindness for weakness. Species that had long relied on fear as currency struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the message. Predators accustomed to asserting dominance now hesitated, unsure how to respond to restraint exercised with such mastery.
Diplomats who had once manipulated, deceived, or intimidated found themselves powerless against a species whose moral authority was backed by undeniable capability. From my perspective, observing humanity was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The galaxy had been shaped for eons by cruelty, power, and survival, and now, for the first time, one species had demonstrated that the greatest force is not destruction. It is the deliberate exercise of restraint by those fully capable of overwhelming violence. Human fleets moved through contested space, not to conquer, but to protect. Star systems previously ravaged by conflict flourished under careful guidance. Refugee fleets were escorted without threat. Trade was facilitated, infrastructure rebuilt, and education restored, all without dominance, all without coercion. And everywhere the principle was the same. Choice is power. Restraint is authority. Mercy is a weapon when wielded with awareness. Humanity had rewritten the rules of interstellar relations without a single act of cruelty. For the first time, observers like me realized that humans were scariest when they were being nice. Not when angry, not when provoked, not when fighting, but when deliberate, controlled, precise, and ethical in the exercise of overwhelming capability. That was their apex state.
That was the point at which the galaxy's most ancient and proud species trembled in awe. The lessons spread across the stars. Every empire, every council, every species observed and internalized the rule. A species that chooses mercy deliberately wields the ultimate power. Those who exploit kindness reveal themselves as threats. Those who respect it may survive. I recorded it all, not as warning, not as prophecy, but as history. Humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer measured in fleets, weapons, or territory. It was measured in principle, choice, and moral clarity. They had demonstrated that peace, when deliberately chosen by those capable of war, is the most terrifying power in existence. And the galaxy understood, finally, that every calculation, every assumption, every projection of power would now have to account for humanity, not merely as apex predators, but as masters of restraint, stewards of morality, and arbiters of choice. The stars, once defined by conquest, now shimmered under the rule of a new law. Kindness is not weakness, restraint is not incapacity, choice is the ultimate power. And humanity, by choosing peace deliberately, had become the most formidable force in the cosmos. The galaxy would never forget the rule.